one thing I can do here is let it be converted into normal information, which will alter the normals. Usually leave the distance at 1. The strength here can be tweaked in order to control how much black will be indented. The bump node and displacement node are great nodes to use in order to add a bit of depth to your material without having to do any modeling or sculpting. First up, we have the bump node. In order to add a bump to our material, we will need to use a height map and plug that into the height parameter. We can also do this procedurally. For example, we could use a noise texture to add a bit of height. Once we've got height on our bump node, we will plug our normal into the normal parameter of our shader. What essentially this bump node does is it will translate this height information into normal information, so it can be displayed on the object as edited normals to look like a more complex geometry than it actually is. I usually leave the distance at 1, but the strength here can be tweaked in order to control how much intensity our height map will have. If I set my strength all the way down to 0, our height map will be as good as invisible, and when I set it to 1, it will be fully visible. Finally, we have the invert, and this works very similarly to the invert node. And when we left click this checkbox, what is currently protruding will now appear as indentations. So just to recap, a height map is a black and white texture that is commonly used with a bump and displacement nodes and modifiers. With a bump map, it will be converted into normal information, which will alter the normals, altering the appearance of the object. With a displacement node, it will alter the vertices of the mesh itself. As we covered in the maps tutorial, the shades between white and black will have a numeric value between 0 and 1. Completely black is 0 and completely white is 1. So this means for bump and displacement, the white areas will be protruding, whereas the areas that are black will be indentations. Coming back to our bump node here, we might want to add multiple bumps. For example, in our final project, we're going to have surface imperfections for the brick and a protrusion of the bricks themselves. So to do this, we would need to do 2 bumps on one shader. Thankfully, this is very simple to do. All we would need to do is press Shift A, add another bump node, then we can set up our bump node by connecting our height map, and then plug the normal into the normal of the other bump. And essentially, it will just carry on this information to the next bump node. Keep in mind, when we alter the strength of the last bump node, it won't impact the bump before it, since it's stored in this normal channel here, which won't be affected by things like the strength or the invert. So think of it as all these settings apart from the normal are exclusive to the specific node, whereas normal input information will not be changed. Before we cover displacement, we're going to need to set up a few settings. First of all, I'm going to create a quick material. So with my cube selected, I'll press plus new, then I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for displacement. The displacement node will just plug into the displacement of the material output. By default, when we're using our displacement node, it will act almost a bit like a bump, but we're wanting to use our displacement to the full effect. So I'm going to take my height map that we used in the bump example by just adding an image texture, pressing open and finding my image, and I'll change my color space to non-color, press Ctrl T, make sure we're using the UV coordinate, plug my color into the height, then in the 3D viewport, I'll press tab, enter edit mode, A to select everything, U, smart UV project, change your island margin to around 0.3. Straight away you can see our bump effect, but this isn't using the full effect of displacement. So there's 2 ways I can enable this next option. I can come down to my options tab by pressing N in my shader editor, then under settings, changing it from bump only to either displacement only or displacement and bump. Keep in mind, displacement only will have a better quality displacement, but you might need to do displacement and bump if you're using a combination of both bump effects and displacement effects. For now we'll use displacement only. You can see our cube is gone all obscure, and that's because unlike bump nodes, displacement doesn't alter normal information, but rather it alters the vertices themselves. And since we've only got a limited amount of vertices here, it's not exactly going to work. So how can we go about fixing this? Well, the first thing we need to do is in our render properties, under render engine, we're going to make sure we're in cycles, since this will not work in Eevee. Then I'm going to change my feature set to experimental. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to add a subdivision surface node, and I will need to set it to experimental to give us the option of an additional subdivision surface option. Then I'm going to, with my cube selected, left click on my wrench. I'm also going to go back into object mode. I'm going to add modifier, and I'm going to choose subdivision surface. Change it to simple, and I'm going to choose adapted subdivision. Straight away you can see that something has changed. I'm going to change my dicing scale to 0.2, and I'll change my levels viewport a little bit higher. Now things are starting to work, but things are a little bit crazy here. One thing I can do here is set my mid level to 1, and this will bring things back to normal for our cube. You can see that the difference between this and bump is quite significant, since there's a lot more detail, and this is why displacement looks absolutely awesome. If you're noticing there's a lot of jagged lines, that can be fixed by increasing the levels viewport here, as well as turning the dicing scale down. And you can also, in object mode, right click and left click shade auto smooth if you have it, or if you don't have that option, just left click shade smooth. Then under our green triangle, under normals, turn on auto smooth, just to make sure we're not shade smoothing anything that shouldn't be shade smooth. What about scale then? Well, scale affects the size of the displacement itself. So if I was to set this to 3, for example, you can see things have gone pretty wild here. I'll return my scale back to 1. So is there any other way we can do displacement? And yes, there is, but this isn't done in the shader editor. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and press X on my material just to remove it. Then I'm going to delete my subdivision surface modifier, and I'm going to change back to supported, since we don't need our feature set to be set to experimental now. Now under our wrench here, I'm going to press add modifier and choose displace, and I'm going to press plus new on this texture option here. You can notice our cube size has changed, and we can fix that by just changing our mid level to 0. But for now I'm going to leave it at 0.5. Then I'm going to come down to this tab at the bottom here, which will allow us to edit our displacement texture. There will be a setting here called image, and we've actually already added our height map into our scene, but if you don't have it, you can just press open and find it. So I'll put that in there. But we're actually facing a similar issue that we had before, and that's that we don't have enough vertices to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and add another subdivision surface, and I'm going to move this one for our displacement modifier. I'll change it to simple. Then I'm just going to go ahead and keep altering this levels viewport. But there's still a bit of an issue. Things are looking really weird here. I'm also going to set my mid level to 1. But you can notice we've still got a lot of issues here. And that's because we're using our local coordinates where we should be using our UV coordinates. And now you can see we're now got this result. If you're still not happy with things, you can experiment either altering the strength to something lower, or you can go ahead and add an additional subdivision surface modifier. You can notice now that I've moved that second subdivision surface modifier to the top, it's now looking a lot smoother. If you don't want to have loads of subdivision surface modifiers, you can just delete this new one we've made. Then I'll go into solid view so it's less laggy. Notice how when we're using the modifier, we can see it even in other viewing modes. And I'll press tab to go into edit mode, and I'm going to press A to select everything, right click, subdivide. And let's subdivide it a few times. I'll go with 5 just now. And now you can see after I've subdivided that, our displacement is looking a lot better. So this is the positive benefit that using the displacement modifier has. We can see this even in our solid view. Which one you prefer to use is really down to your own personal preference. But I personally have found that using the displacement modifier has been a lot faster in my computer. Another benefit of displacement modifier is I can go ahead and make these changes permanent. So the first thing I would need to do is come to my subdivision surface modifier. I'll change my render up to 6 just to be safe. Left click the drop down arrow and left click apply. This might not work in edit mode. Then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to left click the drop down arrow and I can click apply. If you want this effect to be animatable, you can press apply shape key, and that will allow you to animate whether or not the displacement is showing. But for now, I'm just going to press apply. Then when I press tab to go into edit mode, you can see we have a ton of vertices here. If I press 1 on the keyboard, you can see all the vertices we have here. So yeah, great job everyone. Now we're going to have a quick quiz. Number 1. Does the bump node affect the geometry of the mesh or just the normal information at a pixel level? Number 2. If you are using displacement, what options should you enable in Blender? Number 3. How can you combine multiple bumps together? I'll be answering the questions in 15 seconds from now. Number 1. Does bump node affect the geometry of the mesh or just the normal information? The bump node, since it is plugged into the normal of a shader, that means it's affecting the normals at a pixel level. Although it does use a height map and not a normal map, this height map is converted into normal information by the bump node. Using the height map and bump node can be a great alternative to the normal map node and normal map, since you can get a lot more detail. Number 2. If you are using displacement in the shader editor, what options should you enable in Blender? First thing we need to do is make sure we're in the cycles render engine, since displacement in the shader editor is a cycles only feature. Then we're going to change our feature set to experimental so we can add adaptive subdivision to our subdivision surface modifier. Then under modifiers, we'll add our modifier, select subdivision surface. We'll make sure we have our adaptive subdivision on. And the reason we're adding a subdivision surface modifier is because displacement will alter the vertices of a mesh, not the normals. So since we've only got a few vertices here, we need to add a subdivision surface so it's got more geometry to work with. I'm going to set my Dyson scale to something about 0.2 and I'll change my levels viewport up. Then finally, and most importantly, in our settings menu in our shader editor, we're going to open the drop down and change from bump only to displacement and bump or displacement. Keep in mind, displacement will yield a better quality result for displacement than bump and displacement, but you may need to use bump and displacement if you're using a combination of bump nodes and displacement nodes. Number 3. How can you combine multiple bumps together? This is really straightforward. All we need to do is plug the normal of one bump into another and make sure that the last bump node in the chain is connected to our shader. Thankfully, when we edit the parameters in one bump node, it won't alter the bump node of previous versions, since our normal information from previous nodes will be stored in a channel which won't be affected by these parameters. Great job everyone for completing this tutorial. In the next episode, we're going to be starting our final project, and to start off, we're going to make this brick texture. Thank you all so much for watching, and I also want to thank you all for 750 subscribers. It's been amazing that we've achieved this so quickly, so I want to thank you all very much for your support over the past few weeks. With that, I would like to thank you all again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.